Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. And as you can see, I am joined by my two favorite ex-Mormons. This is Bryce Blankenagel and Shannon Grover. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Hello. Happy to be back.
All right.
Always happy to be back. Yeah.
Yeah, gonna have another chat about some Mormonism, and this time we're gonna continue on in this theme that we started in our last get together, where we started talking about hidden Mormon history and events that have been covered up, glossed over, lied about, rewritten, etc., as all groups tend to do in one fashion or another, in sort of, you know, polishing their origin story. But the Mormon Church has some real grisly stuff in its past and some things that are quite unpleasant. And so today we're going to be diving into one of those incidents or episodes, you could say. And this one is actually rather infamous because it's not really hidden, but it's let's just say that it's creatively discussed when it comes to how Mormons talk about it with Mormons, right? So, so I thought we might put a magnifying glass on this, and I was just to get this out of the way. Again, I've spoken about this in the past, but you know, I was very, very intrigued and inspired by a fiction show called American Primeval that aired about a year or two ago, which was a show of incredible production values and very, very well made and very, very gritty, very, very like this is how it was in the mid, 1800s with the beginnings of the Mormon Church in Utah Territory under Brigham Young, who is a character in the show, played by Kim Coates. And there are historically accurate events that happen in the show with an awful lot of colorful, Hollywood rearranging of things, right? But I thought conceptually it looked pretty good for displaying or showing the Mormons as a group, struggling with Native American groups around that area and time period, with settlers, also non-Mormons in that mix, and the kind of stew that created and conflict that drove that time period. So I was fascinated. And so having that little window into that, I started asking, Bryce and Shannon, hey, Mormon history, what's up with this? Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, let me tell you. So here we are, so that they can tell all of us what's up with this incident called the Meadows Massacre, which is the key inciting incident in the show that I just talked about, American Primeval, which is why it's so related to this stuff. So what was it? What happened? And then we can get into the downstream consequences and how it's talked about amongst the Mormon community versus the non-Mormon community. So which of you would like to start?
Bryce?
So I'll preface this by saying I did not get a chance to watch American Primeval. And instead, in prep for this, I reread Will Bagley's Blood of the Prophets, which is the most recent kind of the standard bearer of this. The church recently put out their books, Vengeance is Mine, and a resource compendium, a documentary history resource compendium for everything that they put together. But it was also published by the church as part of of the church's more recent thrust to become more historically transparent. It is still propagandized, and that's an important point to get into all of this. So Blood of the Prophets is kind of the standard work when it comes to this material, and that builds significantly off of Juanita Brooks's book from 1950 titled The Mountain Meadows Massacre. And that was the first book that really tried to dig into the materials, into the surviving documentation, and find documents that had been deliberately suppressed relating to what had taken place. And Juanita Brooks was the first historian to say this was an event of essentially stochastic violence, but the church leadership and Brigham Young specifically were responsible for creating the culture around which the Mountain Meadows Massacre could take place in. And that was kind of a watershed moment because up until Juanita Brooks's book, it was always, it was, the natives and, they were responding to the Baker Fancher Party poisoning the springs and poisoning cattle and killing off natives. And they were just, retaliating. And Brooks's book really kind of framed it in a more historically responsible way to say that this was as a result of the fear and violence, culture of violence that Brigham Young had created. So Will Bagley's book, late 90s, maybe early aughts. I can't remember when Blood of the Prophets was actually published. It's kind of a continuation of Juanita Brooks's legacy and her scholarship. So that is to say that I don't know the fictionalized sake of this as well as I know the source documents and
of course
the most recent histories have been written about this. So that's what I'm going to rely on instead. And I'm happy to hear, and I'm excited to hear how it compares with what I present via the documents, how that compares to American Primeval and popular portrayals of it. But I think we should probably start this off the way we've started off a bunch of these and just say, Shannon, what did you know about Mountain Meadows growing up?
There we go.
Well, because for those who don't already know, I was raised right in the heart of the Mormon corridor, which is Idaho, Utah, into Arizona, get a little bit of Colorado in there, that kind of thing. But that is the basic part of the church. And then you get the ones outside of the Mormon corridor that are a little bit different. And so, it's not quite fundamentalist, but it's also a bit more strict, I guess you could say. And so there's a whole different attitude. But anyway, when I was raised, one, nobody talked about it. And two, if they did, the implication was that it was Mormons who were killed, not Mormons doing the killing. Okay. They're very carefully phrasing it that way so that it was because just like the Hans Mill massacre, Mormons were massacred here. And so I still have to remind myself, but there was a lot of us at my age and, around my age that thought of it as the Mormon Meadows Massacre, not the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And I still have to think, no, it's not Mormon. But yeah, that was very, very heavily implied because no one wanted to even admit that Mormons committed an atrocity there, that they were even capable of it.
Right. Well, there is a tendency on the part of groups like the Mormon Church or the Church of Scientology or, the Catholic Church, where they will take, true events, true historical events, which they had a great deal of responsibility for or a great deal of hand in, and they will spin the story in a Darvo-like fashion where they deny, attack and reverse victim and offender, right? Which is classic predatory narcissistic response behavior to being called out, where they flip the script on the person making the call out and say, no, we were the victims here. And in fact, even asking us is offensive, right? And this kind of thing. Right. And of course, Scientology has done this with, troublesome events in Hubbard's past and in the church's past. And so I'm gathering that's kind of what the Mormon Church was doing with this event. And maybe actually, before we even take one step further in this, we should actually clarify for people what is the event, because we all know, but what, in a nutshell, what happened?
Right.
Essentially, there was a wagon train. Utah was a critical resupply and recruitment point. And when I say recruitment, that's getting your beasts of burden rested up for the trip across the Mojave Desert. Utah was an important point for the westward California migration. And this is within the larger context of the gold rush and with California settlement. There was wagon trains relied on the Mormon settlement to resupply before they made the trip across the desert to make their way into California. One of these wagon trains became branded as an enemy, as spies, as problematic, and within the larger context of the Utah War of 1857. We're going to be discussing all of these in greater detail as we go through this. And the wagon train became branded as spies and as a place where apostates were escaping to California by joining this wagon train. And the result of this was that they were completely iced out of any of their resupplying needs, and they were camped out in a little field just north of modern-day St. George, Utah. And when they were camped out there, the Mormon leadership, the local Mormon leadership, decided that they were problematic enough, that they had seen enough, that these people needed to be killed. So the Mormons set out on a 5-day siege to kill everybody that was part of this wagon train, but they let live all of the children who they believed were too young to tell tales, essentially. And it's from those surviving children that we get a number of the detailed accounts of what actually took place.
Okay, got it. So basically, we're talking about a 5-day action of murder of a number of settlers on the part of Mormons.
Correct.
Right.
Who had also banded together with local Paiute, had bargained with the local Paiutes that whatever we loot from this, you get a cut of the spoils. So they did have Paiute assistance in all of this, but the Paiute support during the attack waned once they realized it was a multi-day siege instead of just a one single attack that was going to exterminate all of the Baker Fancher party. So it's just important to note that this is why this is so notable, is because this is white on white violence. This is the largest white on white massacre in American history, in frontier American history.
How many people were ended up dying in this?
120.
Wow, 120 people just basically slaughtered.
Yeah.
Wow. And and this is actually that 5-day thing is actually one of the key points of difference right off with the difference between what was in the TV show versus the reality, because it was a sort of a sudden and overwhelming attack that wiped out everybody in about 10 minutes is what was shown in the show. So it gets across, the terror and the awfulness and the massacre aspect of it very well, and shows the allyship between the American natives and the Mormons who executed this thing. But it all happens very, very quickly. And when I looked it up later and realized it was a 5-day thing, it actually makes it so much worse in so many ways. Worse. And we'll cover the specifics of this, but just as one point of difference.
Yeah, and the official apology from the church didn't happen until 2007.
Wow, 2007. My goodness.
Yes.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's carry forward with the details of this then. We have a basic idea of 1857, a wagon train, a massacre. So what are all the surrounding things about this? What do we need to know?
So right before we get into all of this, I want to position this within the larger context of battles and massacres that the Mormons had taken part in. Because when the Mormons got to Utah territory beginning in 1847, the gold rush started in 1848, and that ran until the mid to late 1850s. Tens of thousands of Mormons were brought into the Great Basin area in what Shannon called Mormon Corridor, the Morador, right? And that place was already at population cap with the Native Americans that were living there, and now suddenly tens of thousands of people are moving in over the span of a few decades. That creates extreme resource constraints. And of course, because the whites are bringing in the guns, they're bringing in the military training, they're bringing in a lot of things that the Native Americans do not have access to. The Mormons overwhelmingly won any of the wars against the Native Americans. So when we talk about the Mountain Meadows Massacre, we talk about these 120 dead white people. That pales in comparison to the many other massacres that the Mormons had perpetrated. There was a Battle Creek massacre that happened in March of 1849, and that was one of the very first hostilities that happened between the Native Americans and the Mormons. And there were 4 confirmed Mormon deaths in that battle, but there were potentially as many as a few dozen natives who died as a result of that. The numbers are from Mormon sources, so we don't really know. There's also the Battle of Fort Utah that happened in February of 1850, and that was part of the larger Timpanogos War. Mormons convinced the Southern Timpanogos that the Mormons were friendly and lined them all up and shot them. There was more than 100 of the Timpanogos were slaughtered there, and all of the women and the children were taken to Salt Lake City, and they were taken into slavery, or they died shortly after. There's a William McBride massacre that happened in early 1851, and that was 10 go shoot people dead, no Mormon casualties. There's the Porter Rockwell massacre in Skull Valley that happened in April of 1851. That's half a dozen dead Ute peoples. There's the Walker War that took place in 1853, and there's about a dozen documented dead Mormons as a result of this, and there are allusions to 2 to 3 to 4 times that many natives who died as a result of these various battles that took place, but it was an overwhelming Mormon victory. And then the largest of these...
Let me ask you a question real fast here, because I just want to put a couple of things together in my head. So the Mormons are fleeing, religious and, physical persecution in the East, right? Coming west, trying to find their settling place. Mm-hmm. And they decide on, and this is under the leadership of Brigham Young, because Joseph Smith was dead. Yes. And so they come out to Utah. They're out there for 10 years before this Meadows Mountain Massacre happens. And you've just, listed out a number of conflicts where less Mormons than Native Americans were being killed off. And yet I remember from our last episode that there was this idea that Joseph Smith had right from the get-go of converting the Native Americans, and that this would be a population of potential Mormon expansion for them. And I'm frankly, this might be a whole nother thing, the show, but I'm just so amazed at how many Mormons there were. I mean, just people getting on board this Mormon train. And I just, I kind of wondered to myself a little bit, what were these people being told that they dedicated their lives to this thing? Back then, they must have had an incredibly powerful recruitment testimonial or something to be bringing people on board with these numbers, that tens of that thousands of Mormons are showing up in Utah, being called out there for this thing. So anyway, they come out there and what about converting the natives? I thought that was the whole thing, not conflict with them.
Yeah, it was a case-by-case basis. There were a number of one of the native chiefs who was well known, became an ally of the Mormons, was Kanash, and his leadership converted a large group of Native Americans to the church. And the idea was that Brigham Young wanted his men to marry as many squaws, quote unquote, as many Native women as they possibly could in order to raise up the most righteous seed. So part of it was conversion, and it's all within the larger context of assimilation, cultural assimilation, right? And bringing in natives and getting them to convert to the church and partake in the white culture of the time and abandon their heritage and legacy. So there was groups who were obstinate to the Mormons, and there were groups who were accommodationists to the Mormons. And the ones who remained obstinate, it resulted in conflict. The ones who were, who gave in to the assimilation efforts, many of them were brought into the society. Many of their children were adopted into white families in hopes of making them white and delightsome, as per the scriptures, the Book of Mormon scriptures. And that's explicitly, that's the explicit justification from Brigham Young himself.
And that even went on in the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
19, not 18, 1970.
Yeah,
the Indian
understood.
placement program.
The Indian
was-
placement
Right.
program is called, and I had friends involved with that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
That's a whole different show.
yeah. And so there's a lot of these, we have this bifurcated system where we're like, it's either conflict or assimilation. There was also a lot of starvation out of the bands of natives who were not starkly opposed to it, but weren't ever like engaged in open conflict with the Mormons. Because their land was being taken over, a lot of the natives relied on what were called the raids or the depredations, which means that they didn't have food, so they would have to go steal cattle. They would have to steal stuff from the Mormons, and the Mormons saw that as a slight against them, which justified them killing the natives who were running off their cattle and stealing their horses.
Sure.
So that's all part of this tension, and there's also the selling of poisoned goods to the natives to try and exterminate various groups that had marginal success. There was grinding up glass and mixing it up with flour so that it is rendered, I guess, poisonous, tears you up from the inside. So it's a very complicated situation. We're talking here multiple decades of colonial and frontier American history here that is very, very difficult, or not colonial, but colonization, white colonization on frontier American history. And it's very, very difficult. It's very complex. But I also want to point out here that Mormons also perpetrated the largest massacre of Native Americans in American history. And that was the Bear River Massacre, and that took place in January of 1863. That is somewhere between 250 and 500 Shoshone were slaughtered here, and it's called a battle, but it was a massacre because less than 24 Mormons died as a result of this, and beyond the upper estimates are 500. Beyond the 500 Shoshone that were massacred in that 100 somewhere in the ballpark of 160 were captured, and they were sold into slavery or they were adopted into Mormon homes.
My goodness.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Wow.
this is human nature, right? Warfare, slavery, taking the women and being sealed to them as wives. This is part of why a lot of Mormons have native heritage or native blood in their bloodlines, is because of this broader effort
Right.
to assimilate.
Okay.
Because really, take
Okay.
note too, a church that touts themselves as family oriented and love and all that kind of shit, they still very clearly you're either with us or you're against us. There is no live and let live. They were demanding everyone around them let them live the way they wanted to live, but the Mormons would not allow anyone around them that same privilege.
And that's what I
the big one.
thought. That's what I thought was conceptually communicated in that
Yes.
show, American
Did a
Primeval.
very great job.
So well, right? Is that intolerance, and it was a religious-based intolerance.
Very much.
There wasn't, at least in the scripting of the show, it wasn't about skin color, or it wasn't about different heritage or different practices. It was just straight up, we're the holy people, and all of, and if you're not one of us, you're one of those
You're the
horrible
enemy.
people.
Yeah.
The enemy, basically, exactly,
Yeah.
who is immediately spun into a narrative of, if you're not with us, you want us dead.
Yes, it's not just
right.
you're
It's
against
not-
us, you want us dead. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very black and white level of thinking, and I wondered about the accuracy of that. But the numbers and of conflicts you're listing out over those 10 years and the amount of violence perpetuated by the group definitely support the idea that these guys were us versus theming to an extreme degree. I can't think of a more extreme way of getting into an us versus them mindset than, if you're not us, you want us dead. So
So
we
we're
have
gonna
to kill you first, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is this is the worst place to go when it comes to trying to form community or trying to settle and create a homogenous situation. They weren't interested in anything like that.
Right.
We're here. This is ours. and if you're not with us, we have to take you out.
Yeah.
Or assimilate you one way or the other. It's
Exactly.
a Borg kind of mentality.
Absolutely is. There's a line in the second episode of American Primeval, I think, that illustrates everything precisely. And it's when these army officers come and question the Shoshone, who were not even said to have been involved in any of this. But at the end of this statement, the army officer said, "You need to move east to where the government gave you land." And the chief, she's like, "We're going to stay here and she names off the name of their God, gave us. And his line is, "Men who want violence will not care what your gods have given you." And I really like that line because it precisely the attitude that Brigham Young imbued into the Utah Mormons is they wanted violence. They reveled in the violence, frankly. And so they don't care. If they want something, they're going to take it regardless. So,
right. And this seems to be an attitude that began with Joseph Smith. It's not like he was Mr. Pacifist and
no.
Brigham Young comes in as the warrior. This was a continuation of how the whole thing was, the attitudes on which it was founded. Am I right about that?
This is really why they kept getting kicked out of places, because they're like, "No, we get to have this. God says we get to have it. We're going to just take it from you. Too bad, so sad. Become a Mormon if you want to keep your land." And it's like, you're assholes,
Get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
And this ends up in Joseph Smith even getting killed. And so, but within the bubble world of the Mormons, they get to carry on with the narrative that they are the perpetual victims of all of these intolerant people who keep attacking them for no good reason.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's all Mormons get raised with is, we were picked on because of our religion. Well, yeah, because your religion said we get to have all of this. That's why you were persecuted with good reason.
Right.
And so they don't give the whole story. They just give the bet. So there's ellipses in everything we were taught is basically it.
Right. Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's carry on then.
It is important to bring up Joseph Smith here because Joseph was able to strike a perfect balance of the persecution algorithm, right? If a community has no persecution, then they have no common enemy, and they don't have that cohesion and that fraternity that is created when you are being oppressed. Too much persecution, and they're quashed, right? A movement is quashed. So there's a fine balance that persecution needs, that a group needs of persecution in order to remain a cohesive group, and to create that us versus them mentality and to make real the feeling of us versus them. And the way that it was formed in Joseph Smith's time was the people who were enemies of the church were Missourians, because the Missouri Mormon War of 1838 was just the culmination of half a decade of what the Mormons saw as persecution. But the Mormons were, the Missourians had plenty of reason to not like the Mormons. And one of the primary reasons for that was that Joseph gave a revelation that the Mormons should consecrate the property of the Gentiles for the use of the saints. Consecrate means take it and give it to the church for the use of the church.
Right.
And of course, that escalates tensions in any community, whether people act on that revelation or not. If you have a revelation that says, God says I can steal your shit and make it mine, then that's going to create tensions. In addition to that, there's the immigrant factor. Immigrants are always treated, no matter who they are, where they come from, no matter what their circumstances are before they become immigrants. Immigrants are almost always treated as somehow less than the current citizens. When the Missourians, at the time, they had only been living there for less than a generation, because they had been immigrants on native land that was stolen by the federal government.
That's what I was going to say. So it doesn't matter the fact that so many of them were immigrants themselves.
Yeah.
They're going to hate the other immigrants. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, of course. I mean, tribalism is tribalism, and that's where human beings live and always have lived. Mm-hmm. So we'll split up on eye color. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So importantly, the kind of crowning event of the Missouri Mormon War was the Hans Mill Massacre, where 18 Mormon men and boys were shot and killed by Missourians, by a Missouri militia. And therefore, the Missourians became the rally cry for the rest of Joseph's life that anybody who is an enemy is a Missourian. They're a Missourian mobocrat. Mobocrat was the common term that was used interchangeably with Missourian, and anyone who sought to do any harm was either a Missourian or influenced by a Missourian. They were the manifestation of the adversary on earth, essentially. So that mentality carried the Mormons after Joseph was dead. That mentality, Brigham Young weaponized and catalyzed the Mormons to make the migration out to Mexico to make their own settlement. The laws of this nation, they'll do us no justice. We must move to a place where we can truly build Zion, the kingdom of God. And Brigham Young did that, right? So when the Mormons got to Utah, they got to make the rules. And as a result of that, because they were a crucial resupply and recruitment point along the westward migration, that meant that there wasn't a whole lot that the federal government could do or that anybody could do other than just live in the Mormon world while they're passing through. There's not a whole lot they could do. So that meant that the Mormons created fines for people using bad language. The Mormons would fine people for grazing their cattle on government land. The Mormons charged exorbitant prices for goods. They drove hard bargains, but it's like, where else are you going to resupply? You got the Mojave Desert in front of you. What else are you going to do, right? So when people were passing through Utah, they had to live by the Mormon rules, and the Mormons also would offer themselves as escorts to keep people free and clear and protected from native marauders and raiders. And it turns out that most of those Mormon escorts had really, really light fingers when it came to the people that they were escorting. So it was an absolute racket. Utah was an absolute racket until the Transcontinental Railroad was built and there was easy passage through Utah without having to spend any time in Utah.
Right.
Okay. When did that happen? What years are we talking about when the train happened?
When was Golden Spike driven, Shan? Do you remember? I think it was like 67 or 68 or something like that. I think it's very
about 10 years after the Mountain Meadows Massacre is when things started. Okay. Yeah. So we're talking, just to contextualize, we're putting this right in the middle of just wild, uncivilized kind of times. I mean, just the Mormons making the rules or trying to, in conflict with these other groups, which is, again, what part of the point of that show was the conflict between these different groups who all felt they had some right to where they were and what they were doing, and trying to, navigate through working with these other people who felt they had the right to be there, and other people were encroaching on them. So it was a real hodgepodge of conflict. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So,
and the two railroads were connected officially on May 10th, 1869. So that's 12 years after Mountain Meadows happened.
Got it. Okay, got it. Yeah. And as you said, there's been a list of conflicts with Native Americans, and of course, we could probably list out other conflicts with other settlers or wagon trains coming through, et cetera. Easily. You mentioned white-on-white violence, so because the Mormons were not considering themselves, this is white versus brown or white versus red or something. This is us versus everybody.
Yeah, the Gentiles. Yes, the Gentiles and apostates.
It's the saints versus the Gentiles. Yeah.
Yeah. So what brings this to a very Yeah, I mean, this is a Mormon crusade in many ways, because we're going to talk about the Mormon Reformation era. So this becomes the acute confluence of this otherization, this us versus them mentality. The Mormons are exceptionally anti-government, and there's a considerable amount of that exists in the cultural zeitgeist today. But when the government would provide no redress for the Missouri problems, for the Mormons getting kicked out of Nauvoo, their settlements being burned down, and then the Mormons have to go out to build their own government. They established the Nation of Deseret before they were granted Utah territorial status. And once they were granted territorial status, of course, it was filled almost exclusively with Mormon leadership. And importantly, throughout all of this, Brigham Young, prophet of the church, is also the leader of the militia, the territorial militia, which was the Nauvoo Legion. which is what Joseph Smith had formed when they built the city of Nauvoo. He was the director of the Indian Affairs, Office of Indian Affairs, and he was governor of the territory. So he was military, religious, and government supreme authority. And 1857 was the end of his governor tenureship. 1858 is when there was supposed to be an election for a new governor. But an election in Utah during the Mormon Reformation, they're not going to elect somebody who isn't a Brigham Young himself or a Brigham Young crony, right? So James Buchanan, president of the United States, saw that he needed to bring in essentially a military escort for his federal agents that he appointed to serve in the Utah territorial government, because he knew that the Mormons were either going to kill these men or they were not going to allow them to do their job, or whatever the case was. Brigham Young did not want to step down as governor. James Buchanan said, your governorship by the Constitution is up. You have to step down. And this led to what's known as the Utah War and the Mormon Reformation period of 1857. So Brigham Young wanted to cull the weak membership, and that part of this was somebody who was known as Brigham's sledgehammer, this guy named Jedediah Grant. He was tasked with being the figurehead, the leader of the Mormon Reformation, and this required that every Mormon get rebaptized into the church to renew their covenants, that every Mormon consecrate all of their property to the church, which means this is a communalistic system, right? We give all of our property to the church, and then we take out only what we need to survive, and they do it for the support of the poor, but of course that has the power of concentrating all of the resources into just the leadership's hands. This instated home teaching, which is a Mormon spy network where people are on a regular basis visiting other members in the community and then reporting back to their priesthood leaders what's going on, and that's a practice that survives in the culture today. It's called ministering. There was just a lot of the Mormon Reformation was a very terrifying time to be a member of the church. And the people who were not members of the church or would not agree to the Mormon Reformation, they were essentially put on a list. Like, you either leave the territory because you're not a true Mormon, or we will make you leave, or we will disappear you. And a lot of people just went missing during the Mormon Reformation. However, a lot of people who did not want to join, did not want to be part of the Reformation, and apostatized, were called apostates, would join these wagon trains headed out to California, because that would grant them safe passage. They could disguise themselves. They could join the wagon train and say, hey, I'm going to die if I stay around here. Can I please join up with you? And I'll pay you back when I get to California. So that came to be a through line of these wagon trains would cull off some of the Mormons, especially polygamous wives who were in abusive relationships. And when they had no other direction to turn, they could join up with these wagon trains and flee the territory. So Brigham Young, on one hand, needed these wagon trains for the steady supply of resources they were bringing into the valley, but at the same time, they represented multiple points of potential danger and conflict. So Brigham Young was always treating these very delicately, these wagon trains, because he needed them, but on the same time, they were his greatest vulnerability. And same, if ever there was any call of conflict, if ever there was a reason that any of the wagon trains were attacked by Mormons, then the president would have justification that the Mormons are aggressors here, and that would kick off the Cold War into a hot war, right? So if there was any evidence that the Mormons had aggressively attacked somebody, had murdered somebody, had shed blood, then that was going to kick off the Utah War into a hot war, and that's something that Brigham Young did not want to happen, obviously. Because
he knew that they would not be able to deal with an actual incursion by the United States military. Like if the president got serious about the Mormon problem, the Mormons didn't have the numbers to actually, it would be an existential crisis for them if the U.S. military showed up and really got serious about dealing with them.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Brigham was also a pragmatist. So through the mid-1850s, he had been stockpiling resources in preparation for a hot war. And he had communicated to James Buchanan on multiple occasions that he would allow the government officials to come in and take their posts as long as they behave. But if any of the troops entered the valley, then that would kick off the Civil War. He had sent a letter to President Buchanan in September of 1857 that that if the president didn't back down from the Utah Cold War, that, quote, the war cry will resound. It will be peace and rights or the knife and the tomahawk. Let Uncle Sam choose. He had said repeatedly that if Buchanan brings in federal troops and escalates this war, that the Mormons will retreat into the mountains and they will not leave behind a single thing of value to the federal troops. They would burn down all of the buildings. They would burn all of the crops. They would kill all of the cattle. There would be nothing left for them to conquer if the war turned hot. So there was a standoff. And part of this as well was Porter Rockwell and Bill Hickman were leading raids on the federal troops that were coming in. There were 3 supply trains that they burned down, the entire supply trains. There was nobody was shot. Nobody was killed during any of these conflicts. But all of the ground that the troops were, coming across the plains to make to come into the valley to depose or whatever, Brigham Young, to remove him from his office. The Mormon raids had, everywhere that they would go, they would find that all of the grasslands in front of them were burned. So all their livestock, all their beasts of burden wouldn't be able to recruit. So the Mormons committed a guerrilla war on these federal troops to weaken their morale and to essentially starve them out of resources. Right. And notably as well, this was also billed because the Mormons had a fair amount of sway in the public media space. This was billed as a war or an act of aggression by the president against just a religious group who's just trying to live their lives, who are just, what would our founding fathers say, that these people are seeking religious freedom out here and the federal government is attacking us yet again. We were attacked in Missouri. We were attacked in Kirtland. We were attacked in Illinois. And now we're being attacked in Utah by an overpowerful federal government. And they were able to essentially depopularize the war against Buchanan. And they billed it as Buchanan's blunder in all of this. And there was also an economic downturn at the time and it was a very costly war because of the guerrilla warfare. And so the public mind shifted against President Buchanan and in favor of the Mormons when all of this is going on. This is all the Utah War. This is all the Mormon Reformation period. All of these are contextual points that create the mindset and culture that we need to understand that led to the deaths of these people on this wagon train.
Right. And take note too. I graduated high school in 1985. In my classes in public school, in Utah history classes, that's how it was taught, was the Mormon view. We didn't get the legitimate, actual historical view taught to us.
Right. And this is exactly the reason why what you just said right there is the reason why I say Utah is a theocracy under Mormon leadership.
We say that all the time.
Remains. Always is.
Because I get pushback on this, and I am very sure that what I am saying is true. The Mormon Church runs Utah, and if you're the one who's literally writing the history books, what other word am I supposed to use than you're running the show? You're indoctrinating the children in what happened and what the history is, so that their entire view is, oh, the poor Mormons and the awful U.S. government, right?
Yeah,
and this is a group of people who have never considered themselves Americans. They're Mormons, right?
They're Mormons.
And fuck America, right? I mean, it's very much in the root origin story here that this is an anti-American outfit, not to get all patriotic or anything, because I'm not that, but just as a point here, it's not like these people were considering themselves part of the United States. They consider themselves separate from that is clearly what it sounds like.
Well, and consider the factors that went into the separation in the Constitution of church and state and building the wall, because the founding fathers did not want a Brigham Young situation to happen, and lo and behold, it did. It did happen, and it's always going to happen. It's going to fluctuate with the times. It's going to fluctuate with so many factors, cultural, religious factors, global socioeconomic factors, it's always going to fluctuate. But we have the Utah theocracy time to look at that provides a snapshot into why we need to keep religious and government authority separate. Because when somebody says, I control the government and I speak for God, that is a recipe for, well, for disaster, for death, for murder, for conquest, for inquisitions, for whatever you want to call these things, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Could not have put it better myself. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what kind of set all of this off was Parley P. Pratt. And Parley P. Pratt was a member of the Quorum of Apostles. He was an OG Mormon, early 1830s Joseph Smith convert, baptized by either Joseph Smith or Brigham Young himself, was in church leadership the whole time. He had a couple of times with financial problems with the church, and he was excommunicated and then brought back. Or maybe that was Orson Pratt, his brother. I can't remember. So in any case, Parley Pratt had fallen away from the church and come back as a prodigal, and he was in Brigham Young's Quorum of Apostles. But Brigham Young was a hard ass. People didn't like Brigham Young, but he was a good and effective leader. Parley Pratt was a very public facing and very beloved member of the Apostles. He was someone who you could sit down and have a beer with, or have a Brigham tea with, I should say. So he was universally loved in the territory, even though he was an asshole to his wives. Parley Pratt was out proselytizing in San Francisco and converted a woman named Eleanor McLean. And he traveled back across the country and with Eleanor after she had converted to the church and had been sealed to him as one of his many wives. And Hector, Eleanor's former spouse, who was an abusive spouse and a bad man, found out about all of this. And when he saw her reading the Book of Mormon, he abused her and kicked her out of the house and locked her out. And she says that's when my love for him died. Eleanor McLean converted, married Parley Pratt, and Hector McLean caught up with him in a cornfield in Arkansas and shot and stabbed Parley Pratt to death. And Eleanor got back to the Utah territory, and she told her story. And it so happens, coincidence has it, that there was a group, a wagon train that was gathering in Arkansas to make their overland venture through Utah. That's the Baker and Fancher wagon train parties. So when Eleanor returned back to Utah, this widow of Parley Pratt, this very beloved person, and to the extent that she did love him, the extent that she believed in the church, to the extent that Parley Pratt was just a pathway for her to escape an abusive marriage, it doesn't really matter. But Eleanor McLean was seen as this, this recent plural widow of this beloved church leader, and she comes back to Utah and rumors begin that people who are in this wagon train from Arkansas, that the man who shot Parley Pratt is with them, and that he's coming to shoot more Mormon leaders. And thus the rumors begin and coalesce and grow and become even more terrifying. What started as those rumors eventually turned into, many years later, there was, I remember talking to a man in the Fancher party who said that he had the pistol that shot Joseph Smith. There were a bunch of Missourians in that band, and these post hoc justifications, make the Baker Fanchers to be the enemies, to be apostle and prophet slayers, to be these evil people who are trying to persecute the Mormons. And of course, the Utah Mormon War, Brigham Young is able to brand them as, they're government spies within this group, within this wagon train. So don't tell them anything. And more importantly, don't trade with them. Do not trade with them. Do not allow them to graze their cattle on your land. Do not do anything with these people. Starve them out. So that was held to by the Mormons. There was one woman who traded a wheel of cheese to the Baker party, to the Fancher party, and in exchange for 4 quilts, I believe it was, and she was rebuked and threatened with blood atonement for doing that because she went against the wishes of the prophet. So there was a concerted effort to ice them out.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's those certain ways from the temple. Certain
Correct.
slices. Yeah.
And add into this as well, Brigham Young had instated the oath of vengeance into the endowment ritual, which was that I vow to teach unto my children, unto the third and fourth generation. I'm paraphrasing it, but again, unto the third and fourth generations to avenge the blood of the prophets. And of course, Hiram and Joseph Smith dying in Illinois. If anyone is branded as a Missourian, as a perpetrator of that violence that shed the blood of the prophets, you have sworn on oath in the temple that you will avenge the blood of the slain prophets.
Which in and of itself is a treasonous oath.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they didn't remove that till, what was it, in the aughts of 1900?
1920s.
1920s. Okay. Yeah. I was trying to remember when it was.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're saying you're going to avenge these people, who were criminals.
Yes.
Who had committed criminal acts against the United States as a thing, as well as, the abusive stuff they did at a personal level. Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's vowing
so this
to take vigilante
this
justice.
Woman's husband gets killed by this guy, Hector. She gets on this wagon train, and this whole wagon train is accused of a number of things over the years. Mm-hmm. But while it's still a wagon train going through the territory, Brigham Young is like, yeah, those guys are the bad guys. Those guys are the bad guys. Yeah. We have to don't help those people, all because they let a woman become part of their wagon train who...
Not quite. Small correction.
What am I missing here?
Eleanor McLean did not join the Baker Fancher party. She came back to Utah after Parley was shot and told her story.
Oh, she wasn't part of that wagon train.
Correct.
Okay, I missed that.
Correct.
Got it.
But a rumor did spawn, possibly from her, possibly from people who accepted her into the valley, that the person who slew Parley Pratt was part of that wagon train.
Got it. And what did happen to Hector?
The
guy who slew...
I think he just returned back to San Francisco and lived his life.
But not on that wagon train. He didn't.
No, he wasn't part of it. No,
he wasn't part of it at all.
Nope.
And that's the largest takeaway from all of this, is that the Baker Fancher party were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. Big time. Yeah,
and
I get it.
And because of that, the justifications for an act of cold-blooded violence have a long and storied past. And the rumors that started to justify this behavior are degrading and awful and evil and don't have even a single iota of truth to them.
Right.
So
yeah. All of this had to get sorted out over the last 50 years with the document trail and everything, starting in 1950 with
Juanita Brooks's book.
Juanita Brooks, and then this other person. Now I get why the book is called Blood of the Prophets, because I was kind of like, that's a weird name for a book about this, but now I get it.
I will avenge the blood of the prophets.
Oh my God.
Yes.
This is just human stupidity. I mean, just to the apex. I mean, just the like, wow.
Yes.
Oh, these poor people.
So this kind of all of this is all just precursor to all of the cultural factors and the othering that is going on, us versus theming that is going on here. If someone is branded a Missourian, if someone is branded an enemy, if someone is branded a spy, if someone is branded the apostates are allying with these and they're going to escape the terror, whatever the case is, if a group can be branded as them, suddenly the us can justify all sorts of atrocious behavior. And that is what we're about to discuss. So this wagon train made their way through Utah. They're completely iced out. They are not able to resupply in the way that they need to before they make their trek across Nevada and then into the California. And so they're starving, they're thirsty, they're starved of provisions, and they recognize that the entire area was very, very hostile. They had been warned that the Mormons were becoming very hostile towards them, and that we do have evidence that at the beginning of their trip through Utah, they were covering about 8 miles a day. But by the time they left, like south of the like Provo and that area, and they were making their way towards Mount Meadows. They were covering about 12 to 14 miles a day, which is about as fast as a wagon train can move with that many people. So they were aware that things were very, very hostile around them. That they were in. That the Mormons had there's something was in the air. They could tell something was not quite right. So the Baker Fancher Party made their way to this common. It's called a recruitment site. That's Mountain Meadows, and it's a very nice place. It's at like 6,800 feet or something. It's right before you drop down into the Mojave it's a place with a nice spring, flowing water, lots of grass, lots of stuff to recruit the animals, and just to resupply and get ready for the long trek. Fill all of your water barrels to have enough provisions to make it across. It should also be noted that the Baker Fancher Party were also quite wealthy. They were a very wealthy wagon train because when you're immigrating, right? Banks are not, you can't just wire money, right?
Right.
When you are moving your entire life across the country, you're taking everything with you. And that, of course, results in having to stash away your gold and all of your wealth into little holes in the wagons, and all of your finest accessories, all your finest apparel, all of your everything that you hold most dear, all of your most valuable provisions are making the trek with you. So that, of course, lends any of these wagon trains to be rated, but it turns out the Baker Fanchers were a little bit more wealthy in comparison to the other wagon trains that passed through. I do now want to place a content warning here because this is when the violence begins, and I think it's important that, like, American Primeval, I haven't seen it, but it seems like it's very gritty. And at the very beginning, it's like 10 minutes of extreme violence, and it illustrates what happens. And when we're talking about the documentary evidence, it is one thing to say that these 120 men, women, and children were brutally murdered. It's another thing to read the accounts and the evidence that we have that actually portrays that violence and speak authentically to their experience. So I want to put a content warning up for probably the next 15, 20 minutes. We're going to be discussing the actual accounts of what took place during this siege and attack. This is going to be hard for some people to listen to, and if you need to fast forward, please do. But I want to speak these people's truths. So we have a number of accounts surviving because there were children that were deemed too young to tell tales who survived the attack, and they were taken and adopted into Mormon families. And that was until 1859 when the first federal government officials came in and investigated the site, and they found the kids and returned as many of them as they could back to their families in Arkansas. So the accounts come from them. They're children's recollections, and they are recounted many years later. So the exact details, of course, that's to qualify the sources here. But what happens is the Baker Fancher Party make it to Mountain Meadows, and John D. Lee had determined or been part of the orders that this wagon train could not make it out of the valley, and that each and every one of them unto the last had to be used up or done away with. So they thought that this was going to be a one and done attack on September 7th. And John D. Lee was able to ally with the local Paiutes by promising them a cut of the spoils once the attack was done. And the initial idea was they would commit the attack, that they would kill all of the Baker Fancher Party before anybody even had a chance to retaliate. And that it would be over and done with in, 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, right? And then they would just go on their way, and none of them would ever speak of this again. So the first attack began on the morning of September 7th. And this is, let me find this quote from one of the young girls here. From one of the girls, she said, quote, "We were just sitting down to breakfast of quail and cottontail rabbit when the first shot rang out from a nearby gully, and one of the children toppled over, hit by the bullet," end quote. And it was at that moment a shot rang out. One child fell over, probably dead or, mortally wounded, that the Baker Fancher Party realized, oh shit, the warnings that we'd been getting along the way that the Mormons are acting aggressive and hostile, we should have taken them more seriously. This is a problem. So immediately, the Fancher Party began returning fire. And they had a pretty good supply of shot powder with them, and many of them were pretty good shots. So when that first shot rang out, that's also when the first attack of the Paiutes began. And they ran at a frontal assault towards the Baker Fanchers, who shot both at the snipers that were shooting at them from the gully, as well as at the frontal assault natives. And the natives, one of them died was hit and died immediately on the spot. Two others were shot, and they turned around and fled. They had apparently been promised that the Mormon magic was going to protect them, and they were incensed at the fact that they had become part of the first casualties of this conflict. And their support, the Paiute support for John D. Lee, who is the military leader of all of this, quickly waned. And it appears as if over the 5-day siege, that the number of natives who were there shrank greatly until John D. Lee needed reinforcements from the Nauvoo Legion in Cedar City. That's Isaac Haight's group. He was the stake president down there. Isaac Haight sent reinforcements, and that's when the actual final assault took place. Not assault, but when the final massacre actually took place.
Right. Did you say his name is Isaac Haight?
Yeah, Haight.
Haight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Appropriate.
And just a reminder to people, because Mormons like to have their own definitions of words. A stake president is like a bishop kind of thing, or
Like a diocese.
Diocese, yeah, because you have the local congregations that are called a ward, and that's run by a Mormon bishop, and then you have a collection of the wards that is a stake, stake, not ek, and you have a president over that. So, and a collection of stakes is a region, because Mormons organize the hell out of everything. So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Kind of
very
a
well said.
county supervisor
you could say that,
Yeah.
or yeah.
level
'Cause-
More or less, yeah.
of territory kind of thing.
Yeah.
County.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So once the Mormons realized that this was not going to just be a one and done kind of situation, that they needed to lay siege to this group, they did for 5 days. And notably,
They
as
did
well,
a circling of the wagons and all. I mean, they really
Yep.
went siege
Exactly.
mentality pretty
Which you
quick
have
because
to.
they were under siege.
Yeah, you have
And
to.
they had spades. They dug trenches really quickly and had the women and children hiding in the trenches. And the men, they had pushed the dirt up underneath the wagons to create a breastwork. They quickly fortified and realized, oh shit, we're under attack. We have to defend ourselves at any means possible.
Yeah.
Importantly, where they were camped out, they were cut off from water as well. And that's really, really dangerous, right? So 3 days into the siege, the Baker Fanchers sent out two little girls with buckets wearing white dresses as a show, like, we're trying to surrender. We cannot, we're trying, like, they were trying to surrender the whole time, and no acceptance of surrender was taking place. The Mormons were passing their time taking pot shots and sniping at anyone who would show a little bit too much. And throughout the siege, as many as a dozen of the men were shot, a few of the women and children as well. So 3 days into the siege, they are thirsting to death. They send out these two little girls wearing white dresses down to the creek to try and get just some buckets of water, and both of them are shot dead while they're making the trip. So
just a total slaughter is what this was.
Yes, absolutely. So
who is John D. Lee that he just decides one day, this is the thing to do? I'm going to go slaughter 120 people. This is absolutely the righteous thing to do right now. Who is this guy?
So John D. Lee had been a member of the church since the Missouri Mormon War,
Okay.
a friend of Joseph Smith, a close friend of Brigham Young, and a cutthroat and a real bastard. A prime leader in the Nauvoo Legion, a monster of a human being, and extremely abusive to all of his wives as well. John Lee is someone who has this blue Mormon heritage from the original generation of Joseph Smith converts, and has always been more on the kind of militant side of the church. He was an original Danite when that was formed. If you remember back to our episode about
Right.
Joseph Smith, the Danites were formed as a shadow hit squad
Right.
to cut down on apostates and to coerce elected officials by surrounding their houses and forcing them to sign documents under duress. So he's just a son of a bitch, and he's working under. He's one of Brigham Young's get shit done men. Like Porter Rockwell is. If Brigham Young needs something done with discreetness, then he assigns it to John D. Lee. Any number there's a whole gaggle of these men, but we focus on John D. Lee because he was the commander, the military commander who led this assault.
Right.
So
he's basically a religious fanatic in a crusader mentality.
very much so. And I have a quote from John D. Lee actually as a result of all of this. And there's another individual that's caught up in all of this is a guy by the name of Higbee. I think it's John Higbee. There's a lot of names of these assholes to remember. I forget some of their first names.
Understood.
So the Nauvoo Legion reinforcements arrive from Cedar City, and they're discussing whether or not they can justify murdering all of these people. This is 4 days into the siege, right? And Lee asks Higbee, how can you do this without shedding innocent blood? And Higbee says, have not these people threatened to murder our leaders and prophet? And have they not boasted of murdering our prophets, our patriarchs and prophets, Joseph and Hiram? Now talk about shedding innocent blood. Why, brethren, there is not a drop of innocent blood in that entire camp of Gentile outlaws. They are a set of cutthroats, robbers, assassins who aided to shed the blood of our prophets Joseph and Hiram, and it is our orders from all in authority to get the immigrants from their stronghold and help the Indians kill them.
So basically came and gave his blessing to John D. Lee's initiated action. And he's official church spokesperson, so he gets to make these kind of calls. This is where I understand this is a point of deep contention in the history of this as to whether Brigham Young knew, ordered it, tried to stop it, but the order arrived too late. I understand there's some controversy around this issue.
Yeah, there is.
There is. Yeah. I have that quote. We'll talk about it in a few minutes here. I just want to get through
I don't mean to jump the train here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I want to get through all the violence and then we'll discuss
please.
kind of the aftermath and the results of it. So, they, in their minds, had justified these were enemies. They could not be allowed to escape. And that's when, on the morning of Friday, September 11th, 1857, John D. Lee and a few of the other men came into town or into the camp, flashing Masonic signs and holding up a flag. And essentially, they negotiated a truce to get the immigrants to safety before, quote unquote, the Indians could renew their attack. So they came in to the Baker Fanchers and said, hey, we heard that you were under siege. We're here to escort you out safely. But all you have to do is give us all your guns and we'll escort you out. The Nauvoo legionnaires will escort you out. And of course, this sparked a heated debate among the immigrants. One of them said, if you give up your arms, you are a fool. Another said, don't be such goddamned fools. Another one said, if you do, you are dead men. But they had no other options. They were thirsting to death. This was the only sign that they had of like, we have a pathway out of this, because if they don't agree to this, then what happens, right? Then they're killed on the spot, or then, the siege continues. And how long do they survive with no water, right? Like, what other options did they have? So these Mormon leaders come in and negotiate a truce, and they separated off the women and children of the first group, and then all of the men of adolescent age and older were separated off into their own group, and they followed some distance behind the women and children. And after marching for less than an hour, Higbee fired a shot in the air, and he gave the order, "Halt, do your duty to Israel." And the Nauvoo Legion, they had paired up one escort man who was armed with one male member of the Baker Fancher Party. So it was basically a 1-to-1 conversion, that a Mormon, armed Mormon was escorting a non-armed member of the Baker Fanchers. And when he fired off his shot and said, "Halt, do your duty to Israel," that's when the Mormon men turned and shot the men who were in the group behind the women and children.
Wow.
So all of the militiamen, they fired their weapons. That killed the majority of the men in this first wave of executions and began reloading their weapons and everything. And the next half hour is it's a massacre. And it takes place, portrayed in the film is like 10 minutes. It was probably over in less than half an hour. This is where it is awful. There was a man who apparently recognized Higbee in all of this when he was shot in the first volley and didn't die, and he yelled, "Higbee, I wouldn't do this to you." And Higbee replied, and that implies that this was a man who was a defector, an apostate, who had joined up with the Baker Fanchers to leave, to get out of the valley, because it's the Mormon Reformation. There's no other escape. It's desert in every direction that you go. It's desert or plains, and there's no other escape out of the Utah if you apostatize. So it appears this man was one of those people. And Higbee replied, "You would have done the same to me, or just as bad." And that's when he cut the man's throat, which is the Temple Covenant.
Yes.
There's a quote from Nancy Huff. She was 4 years old at the time, and she said, "They began killing everybody. They came to Captain Jack Baker, had me in his arms when he was shot down and fell dead. I saw my mother shot in the forehead and fall dead. The women and children screamed and clung together. Some of the young women begged the assassins after they had run out on us to not kill them, but they had no mercy on them, clubbing their guns and beating out their brains." 6-year-old Calvin Miller, he watched his mother, his father, his 2 brothers, and his 3 sisters killed. He was 6 years old, so he survived. He remembers pulling arrows out of his mother's back until she bled out. It should be noted that the forensic examination did not find anybody who died by arrow wound. So whether or not there was arrows, or whether, according to an even later account of him, that the Mormons had shot or had either shot them or bludgeoned these victims and then shot arrows at them to make it look like it was the Paiutes who did the killing. It's difficult to get the truth out of this. He was 6 years old, right? How well do you actually remember this, right?
Right.
William Young, who was a perpetrator of the violence, said, "I saw them kill a boy with rocks. I saw an Indian holding 2 girls, one in each hand. He held them among the balance of the Indians, and I saw no more of the 2 girls." Here's a 6-year-old Rebecca Dunlap was a victim. She said that she ran and hid behind a sagebrush when the massacre began. 2 of her older sisters were killed right near her and were lying dead by her side. And she heard her baby sister crying and ran to find her. And she found her baby sister entwined in her mother's arms, but that the mother was cold in death. Sarah Dunlap, who was her infant sister, was shot, quote, "shot through her right arm below the elbow by a large ball, breaking both bones and cutting her arm half off." So Rebecca grabbed her wounded sister, ran to the bushes to hide until Jacob Hamlin came along, to whom she, quote, "begged to save her and her little sister."
Wow.
There's William Stewart, who is a Mormon in all of this. Bloodlust overcame him. He was commanded a younger Mormon to kill a woman who had been hit in the heart and was just regaining consciousness. The boy refused the order, and Stewart took it upon himself to plunge his Bowie knife to the hilt in her side. Stewart later recounted that he took the damned Gentile babies by the heels and cracked their skulls over the wagon tires. And another man, George Adair, later claimed in his quote-unquote drunken revels, he would laugh and attempt to imitate the pitiful crushing sound of the skull bones as they struck the iron bands of the wagon hubs. Many,
This is just horrifying Nazi level
Yeah.
shit. This is
Yeah.
awful.
Nazi level. Exactly.
yep.
Yeah, it's just
There were some little
massacre.
girls, this same Stewart aggressor. There were some little girls who were pleaded to Stewart for their lives, and he would, quote, catching them by the hair of their head, he would hurl them to the ground, place his foot upon their little bodies, and cut their throats.
Wow.
John Lee claimed that he saw a 6-month-old infant in his father's arms, and it was, quote, killed by the same bullet that entered his father's breast. It was shot through the head.
Okay. I think we get the
So
idea.
Yeah.
the
How many
violence takes
children
place.
were allowed to survive?
18.
And
And
they were all
one.
under the age of what?
So let me read one more quote of violence here. Nancy Huff, who we read a quote from earlier, recalled that the killers conducted a ritual, sadistic ritual, she called it. They had to teach all of the kids one final lesson after killing all of their parents, their brothers, their sisters, grandparents, everybody. She said, quote, at the close of the massacre, there was 18 children still alive. One girl, some 10 or 12 years old, they said was too big and could tell, so they killed her, leaving 17. And they essentially made an example of her, that she was too old, and they shot her in the head in front of all of these kids who were under the age of 10.
Okay.
My God. My God.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this was implied or put, there are shades of this in what was shown in the show, but
Yeah.
if they had actually gone full tilt on what, on accurately, demonstrating any of this, I'm pretty sure people would have just turned away from the show entirely, because it just would have been too
Yeah.
horrifying.
There's a lot of, like with the babies, that would have been X rating. There's no way in
Oh,
hell they could have
there's no
shown
way.
that.
There's
No.
no way.
And
Yeah.
it is vicious. And, I mean, the implication that we got growing up is that it was over quickly too. Like Hans Mill. Hans Mill did not last for days. It was just, what, a couple hours?
no, it was minutes. It was like 12
Minutes.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got that impression when we were taught about this in school. But the other thing is that there was time for a writer to get a letter to Brigham Young, who waited to answer it. He could have put a stop to it. But by waiting and also just saying, I never ordered this, which he didn't. I mean, he did like every other US president has done and all this other shit, which is plausible deniability.
Right.
He didn't order this to happen. He just made sure that it did, that the
Right.
situation was made so that it would. That's what happened. But that's not what Mormons particularly get taught is, he's the prophet of God. Nothing he could do. He couldn't do anything wrong. So therefore, yeah.
So they're told that if I have this right, they're told that he was notified this was happening, and he sent word,
To stop.
hey, don't do this. And too late. It was already done.
Yep.
I have the communication here.
Okay.
So in his letter, so they sent an express writer after the first attack failed, and they realized this was going to be siege. They immediately sent a writer up to Salt Lake, who arrived. He rode as quickly as he could, and he gave Brigham a communication from John D. Lee that does not survive, but told essentially the situation. And the Brigham said, go rest yourself, come back in at 1 p.m. and I'll have communication for you. And the man returned and took this letter to John Lee. And it said, quote, in regard to immigration trains passing through our settlements, recognize, of course, the distancing, the plausible deniability, I know this letter is going to be published somewhere. Someone is going to find this letter. I need to be very careful about how he writes this. He says, we must not interfere with them until they are first notified to keep away. You must not meddle with them. The Indians we expect will do as they please, but you should try and preserve good feelings with them. And there's plausible deniability, there's Mormon doublespeak, there's coded language, there's everything written in between the lines, because this was all blamed on the Indians to begin with. And he's saying, well, you as Mormons, no. You let them pass, let them be, they're just fine, protect them, do whatever. But the Indians, on the other hand, and it turns out that a number of there was one of the reminiscences of one of the young girls who recalls that after the slaughter and after she was taken to St. George to be part of it, that some of the Indians washed their faces and they became white men. So the Mormons were in tan face throughout all of this, right?
Right.
So let the Indians do what they as they please, but you should try and preserve good feelings. He goes on to say, there are no trains going south that I know of. If those who are there will leave, let them go in peace. While we should be on alert, on hand, and always ready, we should also possess ourselves in patience, preserving ourselves and property, ever remembering that God rules. So that language also preserving ourselves and property. This property was consecrated to the church even before these people were dead. So what does it actually mean to preserve ourselves and our property? And of course, after the first volley, there's bloodshed, right? And Brigham Young knew that as soon as bloodshed happened, that James Buchanan, president, would respond by bringing in a hostile military force into the Utah Valley, who were, remember, camped out in Wyoming, about to descend into the valley to remove Brigham Young from his governorship at this same time. Right. So that's the tensions going on. So Brigham Young's communication, you need to read between the lines. And I read this as he's commanding it. He's not commanding, he's giving his license.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's up to interpretation.
He's certainly leaving doors open for them to take advantage of to continue doing what they were doing.
Correct.
For sure.
Correct.
Right.
And notably as well, Brigham Young being the business genius he was, being the director of the Office of Indian Affairs in the Utah Territory, claimed that because it was the natives who attacked, that the American government was responsible for all of the loss of property, and that he billed the United States government $2,200 for oxen and wagons, and $3,527 for 171 pairs of pants, 135 shirts, 39.5 pounds of gunpowder, 109 pounds of lead, and 14,000 firing caps, plus other miscellaneous items. So essentially, he said that all of this was taken, all of this was stolen by Indians. We need to make good the people who survived this. And he billed the government for everything that was lost, that was raided by the natives. Big scare quotes on all of that. And the government paid half of that bill.
Wow.
And it's notable as well that almost everything that went missing was seen in the hands of Mormons at a later time.
Yes.
Right.
So, it appears as if the natives were able to make off with some of the cattle and some of the provisions, but the wealth, the monetary, the money, gold that they had stashed away, everything that was exceptionally valuable was absorbed and consecrated to the church. Because once again, you shall consecrate the property of the Gentiles for the use of the church.
Yeah.
So what were the immediate after effects of this? Because we have these pieces in play with this, Wyoming detachment of the U.S. Army. We have Brigham Young, with his governorship, and we have John D. Lee walking away from this whole thing with, his pockets full of, these people's stuff and a bunch of dead people. What happens now? What are the consequences of this thing?
So Brigham Young decided that the situation was too hot, and he decides to step down as governor. He has a late night meeting with the commander of the federal forces that were coming across the plains to remove him, and he agrees that I will step down as governor and allow you to install your federal agents. And the vast majority of these federal agents who remained as judges or who were judges, who were justices of the peace, various lawmakers, they had a horrible couple of years, and almost all of them left Utah because the Utah population was completely ungovernable for them. It was Brigham's territory. Everything that happened in the territory was Brigham's business, and nothing happened without his approval and explicit direction. So he steps down from governorship and the director of the Office of Indian Affairs, and federal agents come in, and a federal governor is appointed to replace him, and it is absolute horror. It's horrible for them. There is not a investigation of this until 1859. Now, what initially happens is that the men who perpetrated this, they returned to Cedar City that night, and John D. Lee says that he had a good sleep, and the next day he went back and hastily tried to bury some of the bodies. And they didn't do a very good job. And it wasn't until 1859 that the first non-Mormon eyes set gaze on the Mountain Meadows, and it was just bleached bones and so this was a federal troop that came through the territory, set to investigate what they could. They took documentation, surveyed the land around, made mass graves, and buried the remaining bodies that had not been eaten by the coyotes and wolves and whatever animals were out there. And they built a cairn to this that was, a stack of rocks to memorialize this. And they left a plaque on it that says, "Vengeance is mine, and I come quickly, thus saith the Lord," something to that effect, to memorialize this, because they knew that nothing was actually going to result out of all of this. John D. Lee was tried. Another half a dozen men were tried as perpetrators of this. Mormon men were tried as perpetrators of this. John D. Lee was the only one who was convicted, and it goes through a long and arduous appeals process. And finally, in 1878, I think it is, he's finally executed by firing squad. So more than 20 years after the attack.
1877.
77.
Yeah.
Okay, so him and Brigham Young died the same year. Brigham Young of old age, and
77. So this is 20 years.
20 years later.
20 years later is when he gets executed by firing squad for this.
Yeah.
And
wow.
And earlier than that, Brigham Young excommunicated him in hate.
Correct.
So by doing that, that also kind of threw them out to the wind, so that something actually could happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
And John D. Lee.
So they got scapegoated, basically.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And John D. Lee saw what was happening, saw the scapegoating, and he wrote an autobiography in the days before he was excommunicated, just ripping Brigham Young to shreds.
Like his
but also
words have any value, but I get it.
Right, well, exactly.
But also telling candidly a little bit about his experience and what he did, which
so
it has some value.
Throwing me under the long extended wagon, then I'm going to tell the truth.
I
didn't have buses then.
And that's another reason we have another part of the puzzle picture of what happened in the first place, is because John D. Lee confessed to some of what he did.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
During the entire legal process, right? I mean, it was. I mean, people did stand in trial for this, but I mean, you have more than 100 legionnaires there who committed this atrocity, and one man dies by firing squad for it.
Wow.
And notably, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, well, if are you still talking about what happened right then? Because I was going to bring up the statement made by the church in 2007.
Yeah, well, go ahead and talk about the statement.
Okay, because it's 150 years later when the church finally makes a statement, and I think that the statement. This is, once again, Mormon doublespeak, read between the lines and all of this shit. So first of all, it was not delivered by the prophet. It was delivered by Henry Eyring, who at the time was only an apostle. He actually became part of the first presidency about a month or two later. But he's the one who delivered it. So right there, I mean, this is something that should have been delivered by the prophet himself. And this is what the statement said. "We express profound regret for the massacre carried out in this valley 150 years ago today, and for the
distancing language.
Oh yeah, and for the undue and untold suffering experienced by the victims then and by their relatives to the present time. A separate expression of regret is owed to the Paiute people who have unjustly borne for too long the principal blame for what occurred during the massacre. Although the extent of their involvement is disputed, it is believed they would not have participated without the direction and stimulus provided by local church leaders and members." So right there, Brigham Young is being distanced from it. Nobody's actually saying, we are sorry for what happened. We express profound regret is not an apology. And in fact, and then they're placing the blame on local LDS civic and religious leaders rather than Brigham Young himself, who is the instigator, whether he actually said attack them and kill everybody above the age of 10 or not. He is the instigator by making it apparent that
Of
that's what
course.
he wanted, because that's what big leaders of big corporations who want plausible deniability do. They create the situation. And
Sure.
so, those kind of things, the families, the descendants do not see that as an apology at
No.
all. They're like, we want an actual apology. And they're like, well, and Tuttle, Mark Tuttle, who's the church spokesman, is like, well, okay, we didn't use the word apology. We said profound regret, but that's what it means. No, that's not what that means. It
Right.
means we just regret, really. And it's like, regret what? That the information came out,
Yeah.
that everyone knows it's your fault, and you covered it up for 150 years and refused to admit to any of it. What is it you regret here? Because nobody is saying anything specifically. And take note as well, when I saw that in 2007 was when I started actually looking into the situation, because I saw some of the outrage from people in newspapers
Mhm.
about it, because
Mhm.
they're like, this is not an apology for your part of it.
Right. Not
And
at all. Well, it's
so,
clearly not at all. It's a statement
yes,
that escapes responsibility
exactly.
of any
And
kind, and it's carefully worded to do that. Obviously.
exactly. And the massacre site is owned by the Mormon Church. There
Yep.
is it's called, let's see, what is it called? The Mountain Meadows Monument Foundation, which is based in Arkansas. They have tried
By
to
the
buy that
families.
property. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's the family. They have tried to buy the property of the Meadows for themselves. And because they want it administered through an independent trustee, or else for the property to be leased to the federal government for oversight. It's some kind of national monument. Church not only has turned that down, but went and bought more property in the area to
Yeah.
keep
Sure.
anything from happening there.
Yeah.
Of course.
Now, just a
Well, we don't
brief
want any more forensic investigations, right?
No,
Well,
not at all.
just a brief note on the monuments, right? So, I think it's just immediately after the cairn was built, a couple of years after it, Brigham Young actually goes and visits the site, and there's a possibly apocryphal story about him, but that he surveyed, looked around, and that he just waved his staff without speaking a word, and that within 10 minutes, his men had disassembled the cairn and removed the monument
Yeah.
to try and wipe it away. Right. And now the bodies, there were no more bodies being bleached by the sun. There was no more evidence of it. It was just this monument that had been built there, and he ordered the destruction of that monument.
Right.
And it wasn't until I think it's the 1930s that another monument is placed there that memorializes it, and it blames the Paiutes,
Yep.
and says that there were some local Mormons who may have been involved, but it blamed the Paiutes.
Right.
So in the finally, this community is formed in Arkansas by the surviving descendants, right? Because we had 17 kids who survived this and were taken into Mormon homes before they were returned to their families in Arkansas. And they finally pushed the church, and finally they were able to get meetings with Gordon B. Hinckley to get him to agree to build a monument there. Gordon B. Hinckley, prophet at the time in 1999. So they build a monument there, and there's a fascinating bit of history that BYU archaeologists came in and surveyed the land where they wanted to build the new monument, and that's the monument that stands today. It's a recreation of the original 1859 cairn that was placed there, the pile of rocks.
Mm.
And so BYU archaeologists came out and they surveyed the area, and they said, yeah, this looks good. Go ahead and dig right here. And they dug the backhoe, and the first shovelful brought up a huge amount of human remains. And that is, federal law. If you are digging anywhere and you find human remains, you stop what you are doing. You get in touch with authorities, and they have to begin an investigation. It doesn't matter how old they are. It doesn't matter where they came from. It doesn't matter where you are digging. It doesn't matter if it's your property, somebody else's property, government. It doesn't matter. If you are digging and find human remains, you stop digging. So they halted the whole process, and they brought in some non BYU archaeologists to survey and see what they could find. And they, with the blessing of the governor and some non Mormon archaeologists, they were able to to begin digging out some of these mass graves for the actual study and purpose of it. Now, I remember I toured Mountain Meadows when I went to John Whitmer Historical Association last year in St. George, and the one of the people there who was leading the tour once we got to the site was Shannon Novak, who was the paleoanthropologist who worked on this, who was brought in. She had just graduated, and she was called up and said essentially like, "Hey, I got a really really weird job for you. I know you've been studying like grave sites, like Victorian grave sites in antebellum America, but I got a weird one for you." And she was brought in as a non-Mormon consultant, as a non-Mormon archaeologist or anthropologist to study this and see what she could find. And there was a lot of pressure from the church. There was a lot of pressure from the family members who wanted an examination of the remains to see what caused the deaths, right? What percentage were caused by blunt trauma? What percentage were caused by do an autopsy of the gravesite essentially and create a report for it. Under pressure from the families to get an investigation done, Shannon Novak set out and began investigating the remains with the help of the University of Utah. Provided the lab and washed a bunch of the remains that she could examine. She brought in a photographer to help her. And they examined as much as they could until the church said, "Hey, well, we need to build our monument and we want to put the bodies back. So get your shit together, do the investigation fast." And Shannon Novak was like, "I need months. Like, if you want me to do a full report, I need months to investigate these remains." Right? Yeah. She did say something that I thought was quite remarkable when she was doing that interview. That she said, "I don't know why it is, but why is it that every time somebody brings in a loader, they always find the skull?" Because that's what happened. Apparently, in that first shovelful, they cracked a bunch of skulls in the remains. And a big part of that, too, is that when the bodies are just left out, it's usually just torso and head that's left. And usually some amount of the legs, but scavengers are going to pull the arms off, right? They're going to go for soft tissue, then abdomen, and then arms, and then so most of what's remains is going to be skulls and torsos. But she was able to examine those, and so finally an order came down from the governor that the remains were going to be reinterred, and your report, whatever you have done of your report, needs to be concluded within the next 24 hours. So she did burn the midnight candle with her photographer, and they spent as much time as they could with all the remains that they could, examining them, writing up a report, taking as many pictures as they could. And then she returned the remains back to the foundation, or back to, just trying to find her book here, House of Mourning. That's what it's called. So so she returned the remains, and they were reinterred into the land, and then they constructed the monument on top, and then they had a dedication on September 11th, 1999. So she took her experience and wrote a full report on it, and then published it in a book in 2008. It's titled House of Mourning, A Biocultural History of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And she has a fascinating story with all of this. There's a lot of church influence to try and rebury these remains that have been unearthed, to try and get in the way of the government doing a full investigation and of independent researchers. And like even reconstructing the monuments that are there today has its own sordid past and current fightings with the Baker Fancher family foundations and with the church and with, competing interests. And there are a few members of the families who are on friendly terms with the church, and they were at the tour, and they spoke their piece during the tour that I took. But it sounds like the sentiment among the vast majority of the members of the survivors are very, they dislike the church for its hand in all of this, for its continued efforts to try and get rid of this, to try and get it out of the cultural mind, to be like, oh no, it was the Paiutes and there were some Mormons there. Oh no, it was local Mormon leadership. Oh no, whatever. Right. But because we need to talk about this in the larger context, that this was like, these people were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were victims of stochastic violence, and Brigham Young created the culture in which this stochastic violence took place because he did not want to give up power to the government. And the Mormons were incredibly anti-government, and these people were the victims of this anti-government mentality. So and the propagandizing of it afterwards, obviously, immediately after the story, after it all happened, the justifications happen, the post hoc rationalization happens. The immigrant train, they were poisoning the natives, and the natives attacked back. They were all of the women were afflicted with the pox, what they died, and branding them as sexual deviants, and there's so many things that were spun to try and excuse whatever could have happened. Oh, but it was the Paiutes who did it. It wasn't us who did it. But if we did do it, we had reason to do it. But if we didn't have reason to do it, it was just local leadership, right? So there's always the hiding. There's always the retreating goalposts. There's never the actual owning. There's never like taking responsibility. No. And the statement that you read there, Shannon, from 2007, when it was a sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary of it, is very notable in the language they use. So we regret that something bad happened here, not we're sorry we massacred these people.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And take note as well, by the way, under David O. McKay's leadership, he allowed one of John D. Lee's grandsons to be rebaptized by proxy, John D. Lee, back into the church. And that even though Juanita Brooks is like, I'm going to publicize this action, and they were like, no, well, we should rescind it, but they have never rescinded it. He was put back into membership of the church.
Yeah. Well, they've baptized Hitler, haven't they?
Yes, they have numerous times.
There's no shame when it comes to that. There's no bottom.
There's a difference between people that they baptize into the covenant versus people who have been excommunicated.
Yes.
So this is a man who was punished in life, but in death gets full glory.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
All of his lives. So,
and that's a huge deal. Yeah.
I of course, I don't mean to, make it nothing. It's just Jesus. I'm constantly amazed at the deep levels of hypocrisy between the stated values of this organization, the Mormon Church, and its behavior then and now. It seems to be a body that is utterly incapable of acknowledging any degree of historical responsibility for any of the bad things that Brigham Young and Joseph Smith and the string of prophets have carried out. They just won't ever admit they were wrong. And this is, of course, something that Scientology is known for. And it's a characteristic of a group, a destructive cult, that they won't do that. It actually is a characteristic. It's something I've noted over and over and over again. When you see groups who do and are willing to, take their drubbings, from a historical perspective, because you understand nobody who's alive right now is actually responsible for this. That this was carried out by people who are long since gone. And they were horrible people who did horrible things. But what else is new about history? But in the current iteration of the church, rather than and the thing that really gets me about it, just in terms of my summary wrap up of this, is this is a church. This is an organization that is obsessed with history, with DNA, with families, with historical records and accounts. And they have this whole alternative history built into their system with the Book of Mormon, which is so full of nonsense and historical revisionism and just outright lies and nonsense that it's a Janus situation of the church, the Mormon church, can never get right with itself. It's an impossible situation for them to ever be able to get to a place we want them to get to, which is honesty and transparency. That's all we want. We can't rewrite history. It happened. Mm-hmm. But they won't stop trying to rewrite history rather than just acknowledge what happened. And that's what compels people like us to do shows like this. Or, you guys, these people are like liar McLiar faces, and they haven't really changed that much organizationally speaking. Right. It's just cover up, cover up, cover up. And Bryce has really done a job today. Both of y'all have in sharing, just how horrible this cover up, what they're covering up was, and, the degree of culpability that the church has for this, and their complete inability. And I do mean inability. It's not even they want to, or they could, or if there was some, alternate reality where, they could be a kinder, gentler version of themselves. Forget it. None of that's happening. This is an organization that will not go there because they just psychologically, group psychology wise, they can't.
Right.
And if you can't, if a group can't be honest about itself and its own history, then what value is it really bringing to the world, right? Is really where we come to with this, is how can these people claim to have any sense of supernatural or godly truth when they can't even acknowledge the sins of their own past? This is the root hypocrisy at the bottom of the Mormon Church, at the bottom of Scientology, and so many other destructive cults out there. So that's at least my takeaway from all of this.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'll echo that and say there are a lot of lessons to be learned throughout this horrifying tiny snapshot of American history. And this is not just Mormon history. This is American history.
American history.
That too.
There are the implications of supreme power and stochastic violence and other person rhetoric leading to violence. There are so many larger lessons to take from all of this, and just trying to wash this away, ignoring it. Similar, like Mountain Meadows when I was a kid, it was hushed. It was spoken in hushed tones. I didn't even know that it was Mormons who did it until after I deconverted from the church and started learning about church history. It's like there are some deep and abiding human nature lessons to take away from all of this.
Big time. Well, thank you guys. This got, real super horrible and serious for a little while there, but
yes, it did.
This is dark stuff, right? And this is, and that's why I wanted to do this show, is because I knew whatever was shown was awful, but it wasn't even, once I found out this thing went on for 5 days, and, that story about those little girls, I was like, oh, we got to talk about this, because it goes to, as horrible as this is to listen to, this is reality. This is what actually happened. So let's not whitewash it or forget about it or brush it under the rug or try to call it something it wasn't. Let's acknowledge that destructive cults have, violent pasts, and that the Mormon Church is no different. And and to imagine, and I guess my final takeaway on this today is to imagine that us versus them mindset and that degree of violence is not possible now would be straight up delusional. This is a mindset that is easily inculcated in people, and their emotions can be riled up to commit violence. Just like, John D. Lee was not some outlier. He was, this is not some psychopath, who just happened to wander into the path of the, the beneficent Mormon Church, right? This is and that's why I'm so glad Bryce laid out all the historical context for this, because what happened then was a human thing that is just as possible to happen now amongst all these shiny, happy people. So let's keep that in mind, not with a message of let's go commit violence against these people because of this. That's not where I'm coming from at all. I'm not trying to us versus them, the Mormons, right now. I'm trying to say that's what they're about, and we need to be aware of that so we can counter that and have a civilized society without political or religious violence. That's what I'm about. Yes. I'm not about riling up hate towards Mormons, and I want to be super clear about that in today's incendiary environment. That this is not about hating on Mormons. This is about realizing that there's a mindset there that has an underlying potential of radicalization. And that's where I'm coming from on this. Is it's a red alert warning. It's not go take these people out. It's, we got to deal with this. We got to bring that volume down, and we got to like get that belief system where it's not incendiary and violent.
Right.
So that's
results.
just to be super abundant, like real super clear on where I'm coming from with this.
Right. It's of destroying the belief system itself, not the people in the belief system.
Yeah, it's not the people are people. People are
Yeah,
people.
because
right?
you can't. I mean, destroy a person, you're not destroying an idea. You're actually hardening it into stone. Violence is never a victory. Murder is
Exactly.
never a victory.
That's right.
You
That's right.
never ever end the idea. You just make it stronger.
Exactly. So we need to counter these things with better ideas.
Yes.
That's
Because,
where we go, not
exactly.
bullets. We go better ideas.
Spotlight the idea and spotlight a solution. That's what you do.
Yeah. That's right. Exactly. So, all right, guys. Well, we're going to have to get going. So thank you very much for joining me today on this. I'm just speaking to you all, Bryce and Shannon. Thank you very much for your time today. I always appreciate your input and just so much knowledge you're bringing to this. So thanks for sharing it with my
We have a lot of
audience.
fun with this.
Yeah, we do. Thanks for giving us a platform to speak our truths. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks out there, I hope you guys have learned something today. I can't say that that this was all rainbows and butterflies today, but this is as dark as it kind of gets. This is about as bad as it gets, and there it is. And so let's learn from this. Let's look forward to a future where we don't perpetuate the mistakes of the past. We learn from them so that we don't have to have more John D. Lees or Charlie Kirk situations or any of this nonsense.
Exactly.
I'm just so sick and tired of it. It's all so stupid. So that's where I'm coming from. All right. So if you found this podcast entertaining, informative, and educational, which I hope you did, then of course, subscribe to the channel, support the show, and help me bring more stories like this out into the public. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.